Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Polycarp's Paradigm. I'm so excited that you all are checking out the podcast today. In the last episode, I had my dear friend Ethan Stedman share his story, but you know what? We left off at kind of a cliffhanger, and so I'm here now with Ethan again for part 2, and so welcome, Ethan Stedman.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
In my room.
Yes. One day we'll laugh at the context of this, I'm sure. But anyway, yeah, just to recap for those who haven't listened to part 1. First of all, I highly encourage you to listen to part 1 before jumping into this one. But Ethan grew up basically as a Baptist, and in college he became more of a charismatic as part of Antioch Community Church. Then he went to seminary, to Reformed seminary, Reformed being like a Calvinistic, Presbyterian-based seminary. And while he was doing the night school of Antioch Community Church, lest we forget night school.
Lest we forget.
And then he became Anglican. I'm summarizing all of this very quickly. And a huge influence through that process was his desire, kind of like mine when I shared my stories, to be part of the early church. And discovering what the early church actually was like, what they believed and what they practiced, which led him into Anglicanism, which I think we've both identified as basically the gateway drug to Catholicism. But yeah, that's kind of where we left off. So let's pick it back up there where, okay, you had just become part of the Anglican Church, but you're now wrestling with the Orthodox, and then the Catholic thing as well is coming up. So take it away.
Yeah, so in part 1 of this podcast, I think more of what I was saying was kind of like this historical narrative, and I think here in part 2, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of some of the real substantial things. So at this time, it's maybe 2013, 2014. Mm-hmm. I'm an Anglican. I'm seeking to become an Anglican priest. Something I didn't say in part 1 of the podcast, but which is actually a super important part of this process, is that I got married at the very end of college, and had been married for a couple of years whenever I made the transition into Anglicanism. And so that was something that me and my wife were having a lot of discussions about, and we were both feeling like there was something missing in kind of our faith journey. And we were both really looking for something new, I think a lot in our own ways. We were starting to feel a little burnt out on the kind of setting that we had at our church in Dallas, Antioch. And I as I said before, the thing that drew me to Anglicanism, the desire to be part of the historic church or to practice a liturgy that was like the early Christians, that same impulse started driving me past Anglicanism. And I think I saw that coming pretty early on as an Anglican, but I didn't really want to believe it. And so because
that had profound implications if you were to...
Well, yeah, so like...
relationally as well.
So I started kind of broaching the topic of what if we stopped being Protestant to my wife. And that created a little bit of conflict, to say the least. I was looking at Eastern Orthodoxy pretty seriously. I saw that as kind of like the fulfillment of what the Anglican thing was all about. Basically, a primitive church that was rooted in the apostles, that had all of the, smells and bells and practices and rich teaching that goes back. And, there was a lot of unrest over where I was going to land in terms of church, because that obviously implicated my wife, and and she and I were starting to not be on the same page anymore. We got together, really we started dating in high school, and then we're together all through college, and we had that same sort of formation at Antioch.
Mm-hmm. She was a life group leader.
Yeah, she was. And we started to kind of drift in different directions at that point. And, you know, there were a lot of ways that the search for the true church, for me, didn't help kind of that drift that we were experiencing. And so ultimately around the time that I was getting to a crisis in, like, is it Eastern Orthodoxy or Anglicanism or Catholicism, we started having a lot of problems in our marriage, and it ultimately ended in divorce. And so for me, the question of how do I rightly worship God was not an abstraction at all at that point.
Right.
It was very much bound up in how I was thinking about marriage and faithfulness and things like that. And I started to see the church as the bride of Christ in a whole new way. And I think that ultimately really laid a foundation for where the story went with my conversion to Catholicism.
Okay. Yeah, so... Okay, so... Yeah, I mean, just keep going with that. Like, let's just keep... I don't know, like, I want to hear more about, okay, you know, I even went with you to the Anglican Church with your wife at the time, for about a year. I never signed the commitment card, though, so never officially claimed to be Anglican. Never was confirmed Anglican either, so to me it truly was just like a gateway to the Catholic Church. But that's pretty much the reason why I became Catholic a year before you. In a lot of ways, is because you had the relational dynamics going on with your wife at the time, and so there was all these circumstances that,
yeah. And
you were also wrestling with, like, wanting to be a church planner, and, like, how do I live out that missionary zeal as something else, or, like, so yeah, I mean, kind of. Yeah, keep going from there, as far as, you know, and also just touch on this too. Like, how did you wrestle with your calling at the time to lead your wife spiritually and, like, to be married, but also wanting to be authentic to what you were discovering to be the truth, and, like, that tension there of, like, well, I can't just, like, you know, be a doormat and let her just rule everything as far as, like, but I also don't want to lose her over this. And so there's that tension. And I'm sure the verses came back from Jesus of, like, whoever loves father or mother more than me, whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and those sorts of things. But, like, that's a wrestle right there. I mean, so bring us into that.
Yeah, so I think that was one of my biggest personal struggles. Obviously, there were the marriage struggles, but just in terms of things going on in my own self, my vocation was a huge question, because for so many years, I believed very deeply that I was being called to be a pastor, and a pastor who plants churches and grows a community and evangelizes, stuff like that. The only way I could imagine myself existing in the world, if I were to convert, you know, to Orthodoxy or anything, would have been to be a priest. And so my wife, who was very much, you know, mystified by my interest in Eastern Orthodoxy, was also being confronted with the fact that her husband wanted to be an Orthodox priest, which from her, the pictures that she had seen, as I said before, it looked a lot like wizards, had long beards, and, you know, wore long black garb, similar to a cassock, and it was just a very scary thing. But I knew I couldn't be a pastor of a Protestant church anymore, because I felt that would be inauthentic.
Yeah.
And I was still holding out for Anglicanism. In fact, I started studying at an Anglican seminary in Wisconsin over the summers, where I was trying to focus on early church studies. And that seminary, it's Nashotah House Seminary, is known for being kind of like the bastion in the United States for what's called Anglo-Catholicism. So it's the more Catholic-leaning end of Anglicanism. And so what they did was very traditional, and a lot of the students wore cassocks. And so I started leaning into my Catholic or Orthodox leanings while still being an Anglican.
Okay.
And, I struggled very much, as a lot of other guys did at that school, with whether I was going to remain Anglican or follow where some of my convictions were leading into Orthodoxy or, God forbid, the Catholic Church. And so, really, that process was just painfully drawn out because I didn't feel like I could make a decision on that front without my wife's support.
Mm-hmm.
And there really wasn't any support coming. And so as our marriage started falling apart and then ended in separation and then divorce, I started realizing, as I felt like my entire life was falling apart, that I needed to go where I could receive the sacraments.
Yeah. You needed the grace.
I was staying with you, actually, during a portion of that separation time. And I was attending an Anglican church. And the thing in me that was wanting this robust sort of Catholic expression of Anglicanism was not present in that church, and I felt like I was the only person who shared my faith there. And I
all right, me, let's go to church today.
Yeah, and I was very attracted to the Catholic teaching that marriage is indissoluble. Mm-hmm. And I truly believed that. And I, was hearing from some of my pastors at this Anglican church that, hey, if it doesn't work out, then, there's always someone else. And something in me just was like, I don't think that's how marriage works. I think it's like, what God joins together, let no man separate.
So even if the civil government gives you a certificate of divorce, you're not separated, actually. You're still... If it's a real marriage, then you're actually married, and that means you can't get remarried without the act of adultery. That's what you mean by indissoluble, that is permanent.
Yeah, there's this misconception today that the state confers marriage. From the beginning, it was not so.
That's right.
So marriage is a covenant that's made between two people before God. And the only reason the state regulates it at all is because there are certain benefits with tax or access to someone's records or being able to be a decision maker for a person that come with being married. And so they have to have some sort of record of that. But it's commonly understood that the state's the one who confers it and they can take it away. But that's just not the Christian teaching of marriage. And I grew to, in my difficulties with my wife, I grew to have a very strong sense that Jesus and the New Testament in general is very serious that a man should be joined to his wife and that they become one flesh. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to live into that. Mm-hmm. And the only church that actually consistently teaches that was the Catholic Church. And the more I started to think about my, life as a Christian and what church I should belong to, in light of my experience with my marriage, the more I started becoming drawn to Catholic teaching on marriage.
As opposed to the Orthodox Church at that time? Because are they a little fuzzy on some of those issues?
Yeah, well, definitely as opposed to the Anglican Church. The Orthodox Church... They do believe in the indissolubility of marriage, but they also believe in something that they refer to as economia, which is that the bishops of the church can permit divorces in certain circumstances and allow someone to remarry. And something seemed off about that to me.
Okay.
But in really just in terms of orthodoxy in general, I became a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, and there was a certain point where the more research I did, the more I just couldn't get myself to get confirmed there. I did research for years, it felt like, on what are the differences between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. And it felt like the deeper I went down the rabbit hole, the more confused I got. It's a lot of the differences are rooted in history and bad blood,
cultural circumstances,
different cultures, different languages, different philosophical constructs, isolation from one another, to the point that there was all-out schism and no common language to really affect reconciliation. And so I looked at all the really big issues that separate Catholics and Orthodox, the Pope, the Filioque clause in the Nicene Creed. And the more I looked at it, the more there really wasn't a clear winner in my mind. And so ultimately just came down to the question of what role does the Pope have in the Church? Orthodox, they recognize that the Bishop of Rome, who Catholics refer to as the Pope, has the responsibility of being essentially the head of the College of Bishops, of the patriarchs of the Church, and that he did hold that position for at least the first 1,000 years of Christianity. But they believe that the Roman Pope became his role became so elevated in the Western Church's isolation from the Eastern Church that it ceased to be what that role was in the early Church. So they acknowledge the existence of the Pope and his role, and they believe that it should continue, but they believe that it went to excess. Whereas the Western Church would say that the Church has always been defined as being in communion with the Bishop of Rome. And so I figured if I could settle that one issue, then that would tilt it one way or the other. And so I read a lot of stuff on both sides of the issue, and at this time I'm going through a lot of heartache. I think by this point, divorce was imminent, and I just needed the sacraments, but I didn't know where to go. Yeah. And I didn't feel like I was receiving them in my Anglican church. I didn't feel like I was receiving the grace I needed to get through the season I was in. Yeah. I would say maybe the straw that broke the camel's back was a book called The Early Papacy by Adrian Fortescue. It was written about 100 years ago by a former Church of England priest who converted to Catholicism and became a priest. And his whole thesis of the book is that you can find the modern doctrine of the papacy in the first 500 years of Christianity. And he chose the first 500 years because Anglicans, Orthodox, and Catholics all agree that on those 500 years, that was all the early church. All the divisions that took place happened after that. And so if we can, that is the heritage of every Christian, is the first 5 centuries. And so he figured if he can prove the modern doctrine of the papacy from those first 500 years, that would settle the issue. So if I was 50-50 on Orthodoxy and Catholicism at that point, that book pushed it up to about 51-49 in favor of Catholicism.
Whoa. Barely got you, man.
It barely got me in. But, I was thinking of it a certain way, and I just felt the peace of God calling me home towards the Catholic Church. And for me, the whole thing was framed in terms of marriage. It was on my mind. It was on my heart. It was all I thought about was, what does it mean for marriage to be, the image of Christ in the church? And what does that say about Christ? What does it say about the church? As an Anglican, especially as a church planter in preparation, I would go around and try to recruit people to be part of my congregation that might exist one day. And I would talk to people about, Anglicanism and how, it's such a great thing and you should be part of it. And naturally, no one's ever heard that word. And so they're like, oh, what's an Anglican church? And I'd be like, oh, it's so cool. Like, it's like there was the Catholic Church. And then like somewhere around the 1500s, things got weird. And then, by some fortuitous reason, the Church of England got it right, separated from the Roman Church. And it just got into this like really garbled, confusing story. Yeah. And people are like really disinterested because like that's way too complicated. And they just want to like feel like they're spiritual or connected to God. And
right.
Like, how can I do that? And it occurred to me at one point that, I was not wanting to have a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And I, just wanted to reconcile with my wife. I wanted to love her. And even in that time, I just felt like my love for her was very strong. And it occurred to me that if I felt that way as just a flawed man about my wife, how much more does God seek reconciliation with us? How much does he long for his bride? How much is his love indissoluble? And I recognize that God is a much better husband than I was, and that he doesn't cast off his bride. He doesn't cancel his love. He is steadfast with the covenant that he makes. And I was going around as someone trying to start an Anglican church, telling people essentially that at some point in church history, the church that Jesus founded stopped being his bride, or at least his favored bride, which implies that God has multiple brides and he doesn't. But I was going around telling a different story than the one that deep down I knew was true, that God makes covenants and he doesn't break them, and he is committed to them. So even if the church that he founded went astray in some ways or had sinners in it, which it definitely does, there's no point at which God says, you know what, I'm done with you. And I'm going to get rid of this whole thing, and I'm going to start some other thing, because
We'll start Mormonism with giving Joseph Smith golden tablets or something.
Oh, sure. I mean, and it's just, really every single type of Christianity outside of the Catholic Church in some ways tells that narrative that
right.
At a certain point, the historic Catholic Church went astray to the point that God said, you know what, forget it, it's not that important, let's do something else. And I just couldn't live that way anymore, because I couldn't imagine feeling that way about my wife. And, if I, as an imperfect person, felt that way, how much more is God, who is love, how much more does he just unite himself to his bride permanently, indissolubly, we could say. And that started, really affecting my theology, bro.
Whoa.
I realized that there's got to be one church because there's one bride.
Yeah.
And God loves his bride, even if she's not perfect. And, I took that 51% in favor of Catholicism that I had, and I just said, you know what, like, I want to honor Jesus as the bridegroom, and be faithful to him in response to his faithfulness to me. And I need to seek union with him and his church.
Wow.
And so at the very beginning of 2016, I started RCIA. I stopped being a catechumen at the Orthodox Church. And
you had a great sponsor, I think?
Yeah, so there was a guy named Eric Robinson who became Catholic a year before me. And you became my sponsor.
You were on the fast track, though. They were like...
Yeah, I was.
I mean, they were already familiar with your story. And
yeah, I mean, I basically studied my way in before I even started RCIA. And so Father Pat at St. Simon and Jude, I got to talk with him, and he was gracious enough to allow me to just jump right into the existing RCIA class. And so I basically just went through Lent and got confirmed.
And then your second Mass ever was we were in the Holy Land.
Yeah.
That's crazy, on a pilgrimage with Dr. Marcellino D'Ambrosio.
Yeah. I mean, and that was a really rough time for me because that was the time leading up to the actual divorce itself. And being able to take that time, being able to be reconciled to the church, united to the church for the first time, really, and then be able to go to the Holy Land and just see the places that the incarnate Lord walked and taught and did all of the stuff he did. It was so healing for me and kind of set the foundation for what life would be going forward. But as I approached the Catholic Church, I realized that being a divorced person would create some complications that wouldn't have been the case otherwise. And so that was in the back of my mind as well.
Well, I want to really paint that picture for the listeners, because for those who don't really know about the Catholic Church's teaching and Christ's teaching about the indissolubility of marriage and this role that the Church has in granting annulments, that just means basically the Church recognizes that there's one marriage. You get married once and it's indissoluble. The question is, was it a true and legitimate marriage? If it wasn't, then that's when the Church can say, well, it's not actually a marriage. And then you can free to get married really for the first time. But you leave it in the Church's hands, right? You surrender that decision to the Church because they have that authority to look back and say, was it legitimate or not? They have that authority to bind and loose, you could say. And so that's what blows me away by your story to me, is that a lot of people, I think, especially in our culture, even if they came to the conclusion that, I don't know, that you shouldn't get remarried or something. I mean, so many Christians even believe, like, they don't take Jesus' words really seriously. Like, whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. But the Church that Jesus started takes it very seriously. Yeah. That's exactly what he means. And so you went into the Catholic Church where you could have easily gone to the Orthodox, or you could have gone, especially to the Anglicans that were saying, like, hey, you could get remarried, it's fine, whatever. Or you could have, stayed at Antioch, or whatever. You could have invented your own reality, let's say, and just said, no, it's going to be fine. Yeah. But instead, you said, no, this is the truth. I want to conform my life to the truth, and I surrender basically my freedom, my vocation that I held so dear. I'm surrendering it, because if you're divorced, and let's say the Church doesn't grant you that annulment, then you can't become a priest and you can't get remarried, so you would be single the rest of your life. So you go into the Catholic Church, you, Ethan, went into the Catholic Church knowing that that is a possibility, that, like, you would be single the rest of your life. And by that, you mean, like, you'd still be married to your wife, because that's what it means to be indissoluble. So that's why he can't get remarried, because he's still sacramentally married, if it's a real marriage, to his wife, which is also why he couldn't be a priest. So it's like, but you went into the Church seeing all of this, and you surrendered that to the Church. And by surrendering it to the Church, you surrendered it to Christ himself, who's one with his Church anyway. bring us into that a little bit.
So, once my divorce was finalized, I started meeting with a deacon at my parish.
And that was like 4 months after you'd become Catholic that it was finalized civilly, right?
Yeah.
Civil divorce, yeah.
Yeah, so I was not legally married anymore, but because, my ex-wife and I were baptized Christians who were married in a church, in a Methodist church, there's a presumption that we are validly married, if we enter the Catholic Church. And so the church would presume that my marriage continued even though I was divorced. And so they welcomed me just like anyone else. I wasn't, in sin because I was divorced.
So
but
you're still able to receive all the sacraments.
Yeah, because the church doesn't have a category for divorce within the church, it recognizes that there are difficult times whenever people do need to be legally separated, or when one spouse decides to seek divorce, the other one does not, like in my situation. Things like that, they really only affect the legal status that people have. But if someone wanted to be remarried, or as you said, married for the first time in the Catholic Church, then the church would have to do a full, investigation of that marriage and determine if everything was present in it that was necessary to make a true Christian marriage.
Which would be, what are some of those qualities? Like, it has to be free choice of each. And
Yeah. I mean, the core thing is that a true total gift of self is made.
Okay.
And that a covenant's made, and that people do that with knowledge and with sincerity. Obviously, if someone's coerced to be married or something, then that would not be valid. Or if someone entered a marriage with a faulty understanding of what marriage is or what its obligations are, and there was some way that you could demonstrate that, then an annulment tribunal could say, yeah, this marriage wasn't valid from the beginning. So nothing that happens after a marriage can make a marriage annullable, but looking back at the moment that the marriage took place and the state of mind of the people can indicate that there wasn't a valid covenant going on. And so as I was entering the Catholic Church, right after my divorce was finalized, I started meeting with a deacon. You have to have someone in the church be a sponsor for your annulment petition. And since I knew there wasn't going to be any reconciliation, I obviously still wanted to have a family and have that option to get married in the Catholic Church. And so I applied, submitted my petition for nullity for my marriage, which is a very in-depth process. But as you said, you're really putting your future in the hands of Christ by putting it in the hands of the church. Because I'm not the one who gets to decide whether my marriage is valid. I may feel like it wasn't. Maybe I feel like it is. But whenever I submit that petition, competent people in the church whose job it is to analyze these things looked through the history of my marriage, my life, my background, hear from witnesses, and make that determination. And like you said, I had wanted to be a pastor for a long time, and so one of the things I thought of was, well, if I become Catholic, maybe I could be a priest or become a monk or something like that. And if I don't do that, then I'd like to get married. But as it turns out, since I was presumed to be married already, I couldn't actually do either of those things.
Right. Unless
I was granted an annulment. And so the annulment process took about 18 months. It was a very long time. And
which ended up being over 2 years since the civil divorce.
Yeah, because I waited 6 months after the civil divorce to file my petition.
Yeah.
I was told to do that just to have time to clear my head. And I think that was good advice.
Yeah.
And not to just rush from one difficult procedure into another.
Yeah.
But it took 18 months, and
just basically waiting for the church's reply, and along with gathering all the information stuff too.
And that was an extremely nerve-wracking time, because I basically spent that year and a half, trying to figure out what to make of my life when I didn't have any control over it. I didn't know if I would be able to be remarried or have a family. I didn't know if I would ever be able to be a priest or anything. I didn't know if I would be single the rest of my life, working some job that I didn't really care about for no one, just me. And that was a lot of wrestling. I think, though, that was one of the best things I've ever done, was go through that process.
Wow.
Because that forced me to really confront a lot of the deep stuff going on in me, like that terrified feeling of like, what if I never get married? Okay, well, why does my identity depend so much on whether or not I can get married? Well, that was a question I never thought about. Why does my identity depend on so much on, having some sort of like ministry position or something like that, if I didn't get married? I don't know. And so in the meantime, I wasn't in ministry, and I was working, for a company that had me doing a lot of inspections of air conditioning equipment. And so it was like nothing like anything I'd ever done. And, I'm just wearing...
Seminary trained.
Seminary trained. Got my tool belt, got my work boots, my Wranglers. And, just day to day went to work in this role where, I didn't necessarily get any respect or anything like that. Like when you're in seminary and, people are looking at you as like a teacher or a pastor type of guy, and, you feel special. But I didn't feel special. I didn't have a relationship like that. I had some good friends like yourself who I was living with at the time. But it was just a desert season, and it was like a real season of solitude where I had to dive deep and figure out who I was and figure out how to be okay with my life no matter what. And that was very painful, but Christ met me in that. And I think by the time my annulment was granted, which it was this past October
2018.
Yeah, it was actually on St. Faustina's feast day.
Whoa, I didn't realize that.
And during that annulment period...
What day is your feast day?
I want to say it's the 5th.
Okay.
October 5th.
Right after old St. Francis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it was a Friday whenever I got the letter. And for me, that annulment season was very much invested in devotion to the Divine Mercy.
Yeah, wow.
So St. Faustina...
the Apostle of Mercy. She was awesome.
Yeah,
was awesome.
She, along with Maximilian Kolbe and John Paul II, kind of spearheaded the Divine Mercy movement. And so I just spent that entire season soaking in God's love for me. I discovered Marian devotion, and I reached the breakthrough in my relationship with Christ through my relationship with his mother.
Wow.
Which, that's an entire story in itself. But so many things that God gave me that I needed that I don't think I could have ever received unless I was cracked open. And that's what that season was really all about for me.
And one thing you mentioned is that one thing that you were longing for, especially as things were looking more towards divorce leading up to you becoming Catholic, was, I need the grace of the sacraments. So how did the sacramental life of the church through basically the last 3 years then, from that time you became Catholic through the civil divorce, through that whole annulment process, how is centering your life on the Eucharist, experiencing confession, experiencing that initial confirmation, like all the graces that come with the sacraments, how how did that help, and how did that transform you over those years?
Yeah. So whenever I was experiencing depression in the past, there was a good friend in seminary who, would tell me to pray morning and evening prayer and to use those as like check-ins every day. And instead of thinking through how am I going to get like through the next year, just think, how am I going to get through the next 6 hours? And use like the ritual of prayer, the rhythms of prayer as like just like little check marks where you just tell yourself, I'm going to get from morning prayer to my prayer at noon, and between then and then I'm just going to try to love Christ and receive his love and meditate on him. Obviously I'm working this whole time too, but I had a job where I could be on my own quite a bit and thinking or listening to something, and introducing the sacraments into that rhythm had the same function, I think. And obviously there's like the deep spiritual function of actually receiving the grace of God. Yeah. But I would go to daily mass several times a week. I was going to confession a whole lot early on. I think I was struggling with what Catholics call scrupulosity, but I also just had a lot of pain, and I was looking for sort of catharsis and a way to like deal with thoughts or feelings that I had that I thought were wrong or not okay. And eventually a good spiritual director helped me see that I needed to, trust that the grace that God gives me in the Eucharist is sufficient to deal with all my imperfections, and I don't need to like use the confessional as a sort of drug or something. But being able to go to confession, being able to go to adoration at nearby parishes, or whenever I was traveling for work, I traveled quite a bit, and I would usually try to go to a daily mass either in the morning or in the evening after work, wherever we went. And so I got to go to mass in a lot of interesting places. I mean, in Texas, so not like hyper exotic or anything, but like it became just the foundation of my life. I knew that whenever I received Jesus Christ in the Holy Eucharist, that like he couldn't be taken away from me. He was in me. I was in him. Wow. That my identity was so sealed by him that none of my circumstances could make my life worse. All it could do was provide the context in which I find all my needs met in Christ. Yeah. And that became kind of like my philosophy was, there are things I can control, there are things I can't. The things I can control are pressing into Christ, and everything else that's in his hands, it's for the unfolding of providence. But I'm not going to let like my identity or my emotions or my, view of my life depend on external factors. And it took a really long time. I'm, still trying to make that a part of my daily practice, but, I think God changed the way that I think. He changed the way that, basically my entire internal makeup by the regular rhythm of the sacraments and prayer and constantly checking in with them.
Wow. One thing that I think too, growing up as a evangelical or as a Baptist and being part of Antioch and all those things, it's like there can be a lot of confusion. Your relationship with Christ is restricted, I guess you could say, to the spiritual. Whereas the Catholic Church has a very profound incarnational reality to it, that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, that yes, we have a spiritual connection to God because he is spirit, but God also became man and dwelt among us. He became flesh. And so we have these concrete connections with God. We have these concrete opportunities to meet with Jesus in the confessional through the priest. We get to meet him face to face in the Eucharist, though it is, obviously we see Jesus through the light of faith right now. Hopefully later it'll be through the light of glory, and we'll see him face to face in an unveiled way. Because right now he's veiled under the appearance of bread and wine. But how does that kind of play into this, like being like, wow, this is incarnational, or this is concrete. It's not some emotional experience I'm having or some euphoric spiritual experience. Although those things can happen, obviously, and those are great things too in and of themselves sometimes. But as human beings, we're body and soul, so we need that material and immaterial. We need that concreteness. So how did that kind of play a role in all of this too?
Yeah, whenever I was a Protestant, I always had a really hard time with whether or not God forgave me for things that I confessed to him or repented for, because my repentance was in my head, and I didn't necessarily hear him say, like, yeah, Ethan, you're totally forgiven, it's great. Because
if he did speak in your head, he'd definitely sound like that.
Right, he would, in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, it's like Siri. You can like change his voice and stuff in your head.
Wow.
And so that's weird. But like, it was all a mental phenomenon.
Yeah,
repentance, and there was no sort of confirmation of those desires or your repentance. There's no one saying, yes, you're forgiven, or, yes, I'm near to you. There was a real lack of the objective.
Very subjective experience.
Religion was very subjective, and for someone who, doesn't really trust themselves that much, or is aware of how...
Hey, that's me too.
Yeah, so I studied a lot of anthropology, and there's a lot of psychological elements to that, and I'm aware that a lot of people have religious experiences that confirm contradicting beliefs. People have experiences in all sorts of religions, and for them subjectively, that confirms, whatever
their
thing
bias
that they're
was,
into.
yeah.
But there's definitely a tendency, I think, in contemporary Christianity, and especially evangelical Christianity, to emphasize that subjective experience. Like, that something's true because you feel it down in your heart or something. And that's kind of almost unfair to say, but I think there's a lot of that language out there.
Yeah.
Catholicism is very much rooted in what we'd call philosophical realism, that there's a real objective world, there's a real God. We can know things about the world and about God. God encounters us concretely, like you were saying, and the sacraments are essentially those like truly objective touchstones that we have with God. Obviously, Catholics can have subjective experiences of God and religion as well. But whenever you receive the Eucharist, on the power of authority that what you receive is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. It doesn't depend on your feelings.
Yeah.
I often at Mass do not necessarily have grandiose feelings. I don't feel super pumped up. I don't feel like I'm like levitating with joy.
Which would be cool if you were, but...
Would that we did. But I know objectively that what I'm receiving is my Lord and my God, and that He is transforming me.
Right.
I don't have to feel it. Sometimes I do feel it, and sometimes it's very, it's experientially very like vivid, but
yeah,
often it is not. And when I go to confession, like I did this morning, I verbally confess my sins, and someone who is competent to do so tells me with the authority of Christ that my sins are forgiven. I can hear it with my ears.
I absolve you of your sins. as if it's Jesus Christ himself saying that
Yeah.
to you through the mouth of the priest. So you are hearing God himself touching you through the priest and saying, I absolve you of your sins. And like you concretely, audibly hear that.
Right.
And
so,
you're like, whoa, yes, thank you, God.
yeah. And sometimes you leave the confessional and you feel like you've been totally washed.
Yeah.
And sometimes you still feel like guilty. So
Yeah.
you don't feel different. You're like, did I miss something? Like, why do I still feel this way?
Right.
Well, your subjective feelings, while they're part of the reality you live in, are not everything. They're not even most things.
They're subordinate to the objective.
Right.
You could say.
And so by, following the Catholic faith, you are subjecting your mind, which is wishy-washy and prone to all sorts of strange feelings that depend on the chemicals flowing through your body. You subject all of that to the objective reality.
Yeah.
And you train yourself through the use of your brain, and you do that through liturgical practices and rhythms of prayer to begin to think and feel in new ways. And so
Wow.
a regular rhythm of the sacraments begins to change how you subjectively feel things by the constant repetition of the objective realities and being subjected to them and meditating on them and receiving them truly. And then it changes the way that your brain's wired, and you start to feel different sorts of feelings.
And it's amazing, too. I was talking with someone recently about the difference between license and freedom. True freedom isn't just doing whatever you feel like or whatever you can. It's like, it's actually when you humble yourself before the objective reality, that's where you actually flourish in freedom. There's this example of, kids on an island that, let's say the island was just sheer cliffs around it. I forget where I heard this, but you probably heard the analogy too. But
Sounds dangerous.
yeah, exactly. It does. So these kids, they know that it's very dangerous around the edges, so they stay closer to the center and they play and all of that in the center. But my goodness, when you actually build that wall, like really close to the edge, and it's a huge wall that keeps the kids in, then they're actually more free to use more of the island.
Yeah, that's true.
Without having to be afraid of falling off the cliff. And so when you actually come into the objective, when you come into submission, even though that's a dirty word in our culture, but when you conform yourself to God's ways, which are always higher than our ways anyway, there's a sense of freedom and liberty that, like, yes, I'm not God. Like, I'm not my own maker. I didn't cause my own being. And so he has certain designs in place. Like, you didn't invent his teaching on marriage, so you conformed your life to his teaching, and in that, you actually experience the freedom you need to grow and to live in this real world instead of trying to create your own imagination and freedom, which actually ends up leaving you a slave to your senses or a slave to your passions or a slave to something, maybe a slave to sin. But now, your slavery to Christ actually... It's freedom that Christ set you free, and so you're more free than you ever could have possibly been in.
Yeah.
And Jesus came to give us life and life to the full. You can eat of any tree of the garden, just not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can't make the rules of the game, but there's immense freedom in the garden,
Yeah, freedom, in its true sense, is the liberty to pursue the highest good.
Yeah.
And what we often mean by freedom, like, if I didn't want to submit to the church's teaching on marriage, and I was just like, forget this, I'm going to find a church that...
I'll start my own church.
I'm going to find a church that allows me to just get remarried without any process, or lets me get married to multiple women.
I'm not going
to
go to church anymore.
Yeah, or you know what?
Thing.
Why do I have to get married? Why not just... I want to be free to express myself sexually and, without marriage, and just as much as I want. And so when we start talking about freedom that way, the way freedom is often spoken of, what we're really talking about is, like you said, just complete capitulation to our
impulses,
our passions, which are the lower sorts of goods. And if we were made to seek the highest good, and we become so sated on lower goods that we're unable to even perceive the highest good, then that sort of freedom, which is what we think is our liberty to just pursue our passions, it actually puts this iron ceiling right over our heads that prevents us from moving upwards towards the highest good. And so we're actually not free because we no longer have the capacity to even seek our highest good whenever we seek our passions and our flesh, because we're only acknowledging one aspect of our being, whereas the highest good encompasses all aspects of our being.
Wow.
And so freedom, I mean, I knew that I couldn't be happy unless I submitted to the church.
Yeah.
And just decided I was going to conform my life to the teachings of Christ given to the apostles. Even if I had to be single the rest of my life, even if my life didn't turn out anything like I thought it would.
At least your conscience would have been clean.
My conscience would have been clean, and I actually would have been experiencing life at the fullest. Because I would have been able to commune with Christ,
who is the author of your life.
Who is love.
Yes.
And
who is love.
If my desire is for love, and that's ultimately why I have all this anxiety about my annulment, well, even if I was able to get married, that's only a sacrament in an image, in an imperfect one, of the union that my soul is destined to have with God. And so, if I can't find that union with God and live into it, then what business do I have seeking lesser goods?
Yeah. That
only perhaps blind me to my need for deeper union with God, deeper love.
Yeah.
And so, I was meeting with the spiritual director and talking about all my anxiety about, I don't know if I'll ever get married. I don't know what was me. And he was just like, look, and I love this guy. He was just like, if your annulment's not granted, that means that God's will for you is that you live your life faithful to the woman you're married to. And if that's what God's will is, then that's the best thing for you. So why would you want to do anything else? And I'm just like, shut up. And I told him that. I was like, shut up.
Can you give me something I actually want to hear?
Yeah, and he was just like, but he's so right. It almost sounds like a cop-out thing to tell somebody, but it's so true, because if we're seeking the highest good, then what we get is the pathway towards our obedience. It's the pathway of our obedience. It's the form our obedience takes, is we can only respond to what we receive. And the greatest saints were forged out of very difficult situations that they would not have chosen, but because they were faithful in them, they conquered the world. And, I was just like, I can do that. Maybe for me, I'm not facing getting beheaded or a year in the Tower of London like Thomas More, my patron. But if for me, facing down my fear of being alone or something like that was how I could honor Christ, then, why would I not do that? I mean, that's the highest good. Right. And if that's what he's giving me as the vehicle by which I enter into his goodness, then why would I try to call an Uber instead or walk there if he's giving me something that's my vehicle into holiness? So it all has to be framed in terms of how can I become holy?
If we find our lives, we'll lose it, but if we lose our life for his sake, we'll find it.
Yeah.
And
I hate that. I'm joking, but
but it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's true. And I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis's picture of you could stay as children playing in mud puddles, but why would you do that when there's an ocean out there?
Yeah.
And then I recently read a book last year, Abandonment to Divine Providence. And the whole theme was just surrender to the divine will. Just surrender. And in that surrender, you have so much peace and joy and you can have thankfulness. And that's one of the most profound teachings of the Catholic Church that I've learned over the years, is the suffering, the perspective of suffering in the church, of how you can actually unite your suffering with Christ crucified for the salvation of the world, as even an intercession for your friends and your family. It actually redeems your suffering. Suffering has meaning. So unlike the rapture that we talked about last time, where you're snatched out of suffering and you escape it, in the Catholic Church, no, you embrace it as a gift like St. Paul did. It has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. I always thought that meant that I had to be a martyr someday, but the good news is that I can live a martyrdom life today, in that whatever suffering I experience, I unite it with Christ, and then I have meaning. So did you find that during your obviously difficult times of like, okay, Lord, I'm just uniting this with you
Yeah. I discovered that, when I was like 27 years old, the idea of uniting your sufferings with Christ, and that was like a big Catholic thing. I found out from a lot of my cradle Catholic friends that that's like a total cliche, and that everyone's just like, oh God, that's what everyone's mom
offer it up. But for us, it was like, what? What does this mean?
It was mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing, yeah.
And so the way I was able to get through a lot of really difficult times where, I was just wanting reconciliation with my wife so badly, and I was missing her, and was just having to go to work and, go back home to my apartment every day by myself. I would be able to, consciously in my prayer offer up that suffering for her, or for whatever God wanted to do. But when I did that, it gave it some sort of direction and meaning. Because the struggle is that suffering often feels meaningless and pointless. But Christ redeems the world primarily through suffering. And so suffering, while not inherently good, because it isn't.
Right. One day it'll be wiped away, praise God.
Right. But it's also, and it's the tool of the devil, but it's also a tool that can be
redeemed,
taken from him and used against him.
Yeah.
We can press into suffering to unite ourselves with Christ and to seek the good of others. And so that got me through a lot of things.
It's cool when you, and I think maybe even as you were in your seminary formation, to see the big picture of the Bible, and then when you became Catholic, you're now part of that new Israel, that covenant community that Christ himself established. So you see yourself now in this grand big picture, this meta-narrative of the universe, right?
Yeah.
This grand story. And then for me, as I learn about the saints that have gone before us and their lives and their sufferings, it's amazing to be like, okay, like I'm part of this story, and you realize that, hey, this suffering that really sucks right now, like it's actually going to be part of the big story, and I can unite it to the bigger story of Christ and his redemption of the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, the kind of Christianity that I grew up with was basically saying God created the whole world so that humanity could fall, and then by dying on the cross he could pick them back up again, just to show them that he's good and he would be willing to do something nice like that. It's a very sort of passive reality where it's like you just need to intellectually, passively assent to the fact that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, and then you just kind of wait until you die so you can go to heaven. But Catholic Christianity is like super hands-on, very active, not passive. You participate in all the work that God does. You don't just receive it passively through mental assent, but you actually complete what is lacking in Christ's sufferings.
St. Paul says
in your own body.
Yeah.
Just like St. Paul said he did. Because you're able to take your suffering and have it redeemed by union with the Redeemer, and it transfigures everything, and you become, by grace, like God is by nature.
I was hoping we would touch on theosis.
Okay, there we go.
Divinization.
We did it. We got
Let's
there.
see, we have, let's say 10 more minutes or so.
Okay.
And I do want to ask more questions, but this is like my favorite summary of the gospel. That Christ shared in our humanity that we might share in his divinity.
Preach.
Ooh, Shiki Baba. That's right, I said it. Or, like St. Athanasius, God became man that man might become God.
Shut up.
Yeah, I know. Which I always have to clarify that because I do want to make sure that really what we're saying, we don't become he who is, right? We don't become this infinite being that's always existed or something that we have some sort of reincarnation, pre-incarnate soul or something like that or whatever. But, like you said, we participate in the very life of God by grace, the very life that he is by nature. And so, yes, we need to always have those distinctions in mind of creature-creator, but at the same time, we also kind of need to open up to the reality of theosis and divinization because there's not really very many limits to that other than that distinction that's always present just by nature of who we are as finite beings, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me, the most helpful thing is all that stuff about Mary because she's the most divinized. She's the most one in theosis, most united to God, which makes sense of her intercessory power, her ruling and reigning with Christ's power. But it also is emphasizing the church that we do not worship her as God, because she's not. She's still a creature. At the same time, we can see, wow, how much she shares in the very life of God. And that gives us hope that that's our destiny as well. So I don't know what you want to say about theosis or divinization. Just do it.
I think I heard someone say that if there's a fence that separates creation from the uncreated, from God, then Mary sits on the fence.
Whoa. Oh my goodness.
Straddling both worlds, being a creature, but participating in the divine nature. And ultimately, that's what we're all called towards.
Right, we're all called to rule and reign with Christ someday.
Mary does so in her body fully as a resurrected person. I mean, whether or not she actually died, who knows? But, like, she has her body and she's, fully glorified.
Yeah.
And so, that, the teaching of theosis saved my faith, I think.
Wow.
Because
how?
it's actually good news. It's not just God made people failed, God will forgive you if you believe that Jesus died for you, and then all of a sudden you get restored back to where you started. But, like, teaching theosis, the teaching of the Catholic Church from the beginning is that, like, God has too much love to keep it to himself, and so he makes things that are not him to share in all that he is.
Whoa.
Just for their sake. Just so that they can have joy.
Just because he loves them.
Something that didn't exist before can have joy. Just because God is who he is. And that's nuts. And the way that we seek our joy in him is by being invited into him. Like, taking on his nature, as St. Athanasius said, becoming God. I think St.
Augustine said it too. And Aquinas.
In Basil the Great, actually, in one of the office readings recently.
Yes, he did. He said the exact same thing.
Yeah, and on the Holy Spirit, he talks about that. And obviously, there's a distinction between God in God's self and then God as participation in God. But that's what we're called into. And Adam and Eve they didn't arrive when they were made. They were just like infants. And the process of the fall and redemption is just getting man to a place where, like, he can actually take off into what God intended for him.
Yeah.
And her.
And the mystery of evil and the mystery of suffering, what I love is, echoing, I guess, St. Augustine here, is that and the Catholic Church's teaching is that, we don't have all the answers for why certain things happen, but what we do know is that God has the power and indeed does create greater good even out of evil.
Yeah.
So he only permits evil to happen in order that he can create a greater good.
Yeah.
And the most evil thing that has ever happened and ever will happen on the earth is the crucifixion of God, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But out of that came the greatest good that is possible for us, which is our salvation in his resurrection and then his ascension glorification. And so out of the greatest evil came the greatest good. And so we don't want to go back to the garden. We want to press forward to divinization, to theosis, to the original temptation that Satan gave, that you will be like God. Well, that was a lie, because they already were like God, right?
Yeah.
They were made in his image and likeness, but they were trying to grasp at it. That was the temptation. Whereas in divinization and theosis, we don't grasp at the sacraments. We receive the sacraments, and by receiving God himself in the Eucharist, we transform into a participation in God and press forward to sharing the life of God.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is the life of love beyond all telling. So, my goodness.
Not bad.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I just want to ask a couple more questions, if that's cool with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a former, I'm going to ask basically a couple questions. Okay, what would you say to people that are still in that Baptist world like you grew up in, that Baptist evangelical world? And then I'm going to take you through kind of your conversion. So what would you say to them? Then what would you say to Antiochers, or the people that are in charismatic or maybe Pentecostal sort of churches? Charismatic. And then Anglicans, then Orthodox, and then to your fellow Catholics. So start with the...
That's a lot of things. I might combine the Baptist and then the Antioch stuff and just kind of hit the nuances.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, really just the heart of what's going on in really the Baptist movement, non-denominational movement, broadly speaking, in the charismatic movement, and Antioch kind of straddles those worlds, is that desire to be like the early church.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. And to live into all that God has for you, that's beautiful. That's exactly what you should be thinking.
Yes.
But I would say take that to its logical conclusion and explore the early church and make sure that you're conformed to what that early church looks like. And don't be content with half measures. So just give yourself to that process and take it as far as it goes. I mean,
yeah.
For me, obviously, for Eric, who is you? I guess I'm talking to them. So yeah.
Yeah, no, you can
change in person. So it did involve becoming Catholic by following it to its logical conclusion. But I think that impulse is so good that it needs to be followed through.
Yeah.
So go do it.
Yeah. Okay. And what about Anglicans?
Oh wow. Well, there's so many different types of Anglicans. The ones who I think are really struggling with this question are the more Catholic-leaning Anglicans.
Yeah.
Who are trying to figure out what to do now that really the Anglican Church and pretty much the entire Western world is very severely compromised. And they're trying to figure out how much longer they can remain part of that church, basically just gripping onto their beliefs about the Church of England's apostolic succession and the validity of sacraments. Many of them, especially the ones who are ordained, they believe that they've been validly ordained because their church possesses some sort of apostolic succession, and they believe that it would be sin for them to essentially deny their ordination or their consecrations of the Eucharist by converting to Roman Catholicism and having to be reordained if they wanted to be a priest. For them, that would be a denial of their ordination. And, I understand kind of the tug of that line of reasoning because so many of those men and women are just some of the most faithful, committed Christian people that I
Yeah.
know. And they exemplify bearing with, a corrupted bride, the way that God does. Because in a lot of ways, the churches that they're connected with, demonstrate a whole lot of compromise. And so, but I would say, I don't know, it's hard, but essentially, seek the unity of the church. Seek full communion with the Lord and follow that wherever it goes. Seek full communion with the Bishop of Rome in the one Catholic Church. Seeking that unity is the ultimate expression of love for Christ, even if it's very difficult to do, and it requires you to lose your pension or your career, and it makes a hardship for your family. Obviously, that's a very personal decision that has to be made, but I think the wisdom of the church has, in the grace of the Holy Spirit, has allowed it to persist in having a consistent moral stance and theological stance throughout the centuries. And a lot of the parts of the Anglican Communion that are not falling apart show that that same sort of covering doesn't appear to be present. And I try to be very careful about what I say about the Anglican Communion, because that's in a lot of ways where I feel like I became a Catholic was as an Anglican. And if it wasn't for the Catholic Church making definitive statements on the validity of Anglican ordinations and things like that, I would probably remain agnostic on that issue. But seek the fullness.
And then what about Orthodox? Our Orthodox brothers and sisters out there.
Yeah, part of me just wants to say, keep on trucking.
I know, they're so legit.
But, the same urgency. I just listened to your podcast on Eucharist, which I thought was phenomenal. If anyone out there hasn't listened to it, you really should.
Episode 9.
A lot of ways in which it frames the issue of the Eucharist very well. But there's, you said that it was a very, what do you say, the issue is
it's a sacrament of unity, so
it's high stakes.
It's a high stakes conversation,
especially when you're talking to Protestants, because that's something that they don't participate in the same way. The Orthodox, however, do participate in it, and so it's harder to feel that sense of urgency when it comes to talking to them about union with the Catholic Church. But there's a lot of disunity in the Orthodox Church, and and I have plenty of Orthodox throw that back in my face, so I get it. But the unity of the faith is truly found in communion with Rome, and regardless of your liturgical persuasion, there are Catholic churches that participate in all of those rites. And so, but just explore it. See, that was the issue for me, was the papacy. I think that is the ultimate issue. And I would say just seek the truth on that issue, and then do what your conscience tells you. Yeah. But don't abandon Christ in the Eucharist either way.
Yeah. And what would you just say, final question, any parting words for our listeners? Some may not even be Christian and just be exploring and wanting to know more and all these things, but what would you just be your parting message to the listeners out there, and just to, whatever your parting message would be?
Oh.
Not that I won't have you back on, because I definitely want to have you back on, but just
Sure.
for this podcast episode.
I would say that there's a lot of different ways of approaching new ideas And whenever I talk to people about how I became a Catholic, I've framed it in terms of trying on lenses.
Yep.
And so if you don't think your vision's great, or if you feel like you're longing for something more, to break the metaphor, you go to an eye doctor and you try on different lenses. And you try on different ones until things seem clear. And somehow you just know when things are clear. They're in focus. You feel like things make sense. The different ideologies and philosophies of the world are essentially different lenses. And I, as you could tell from my story, have tried on a lot of lenses.
Yeah.
And, until you try them on, it's really hard to know kind of whether they are legit or not. For me, trying on the Catholic faith, trying on those lenses, put the world and my life into focus in a way that it had not been before, and that nothing else had put it in all of my experience. And so that's one way that I've come to a confidence in the truth of the Catholic faith, is that whenever I try it on, I see clearly. And I think we all somehow can intuitively know whenever we see clearly. We know when things are right. We feel it in our souls. If you are unsure, I would challenge you not to just go on message boards and listen and read debates about Catholicism on minutia of doctrine, but try it on. Try developing a regular prayer life, or visiting Mass, or going to adoration, or thinking in terms of Catholic morality or social teaching, and see if the world doesn't come into sharper focus.
That's good. Wow. And then one last question. What would you say to fellow Catholics that have that lens, or maybe grew up with that lens, that maybe they just struggle right now or something, I don't know, but you just want to encourage your fellow lens wearers?
Yeah. If you haven't been to confession in a long time and you feel distant from the Lord, go to confession, receive the Eucharist, constantly fill your mind with truth.
Yeah.
And just simply ask God to meet you where you are. And God does all sorts of interesting things. So I dare you to do that. I bet you won't do that. I bet you won't do that.
Challenge accepted. Challenge put out there by Ethan Stedman. Well, thank you so much, brother. Always awesome talking with you, and thanks for being vulnerable and sharing your story. Yeah. And that was just such an honor to listen to the story again, even though I lived it with you throughout those years. Exactly. Too. And we are interconnected forever because of our common journey, really. And so it's really cool. So, well, thank you, and thank you, God, for you being awesome and showing us all these amazing things. And also thank you to the listeners out there, and I hope you all have a great day. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed the program. and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.